Hello and welcome to this video for my IGCSE Biology class. Unfortunately, I can't be with you right now due to the COVID-19 lockdown of the school, so I'm going to try to do this from home. I do apologize for the bad camera, the bad lighting, and the very small whiteboard, but this is unfortunately all the things I have to do with right now. Today I'm going to be talking about section 22.2 in your book. This wonderful little work here, or if you're following the syllabus, it's 21.2 in the syllabus, which is habitat destruction. But before we get into more detail about habitat and habitat destruction, first let me take you for a little walk in my garden. So, in biology, we define a habitat to a place where some organism can live. And some habitats will have a much higher biodiversity than others. For example, just here in our garden, here I have this habitat here with some shrubbery and a lot of mixed vegetation. So in here you will have way more niches for organisms to live. Under here you'll probably find some hedgehogs, there'll be snails, I've seen toads over here. So something like this will have quite high biodiversity. On the other hand, if you look out here on like the grass, this is pretty much a monoculture, which means we only have one or two organisms living here, which is the grass and in this case here the moss. So this has a lower biodiversity, and over here we can see an example on what habitat destruction would look like. Here I have done deforestation. There used to be trees here, but I now cut them away, and now we just have the soil lying around. And if this was done in major scale, deforestation like this will lead to loss of the habitat, and rain would wash away the soils. Of course, this is just my garden and not the Amazons, but this just will give you an idea what I'm talking about when I'm talking about habitat destruction. So welcome back. As you can see, just from my garden, all organisms impact the environment, some way more than others. What I do have a huge impact on my garden, if I mow the lawn or not, if I cut down trees or not. But we must be aware that all organisms have some kind of impact on the environment. For example, large grazing animals shape the environment, shape the forest. So if we have a large herd of, say, deer, they will also shape the environment, shape the forest they're living in. But we humans do so in a different scale than other organisms. We change the environment to how we like it. And if we look on how humans were like many thousand years ago, we were a smaller impact. But now, due to the amount of people and our technology, we now have a much larger impact on the world around us. And one way we do this is what we call habitat destruction. And it simply means that by changing the world to things we want, cities, fields for farming, airports, roads, and so on. By doing that, we end up changing or destroying the natural habitat that was there before. And that leads to a decrease in biodiversity, and it can also lead to other problems, as we'll get into later. Another way we damage our natural habitat is by mining. Especially strip mining, where you just strip away the topsoil and dig down to get whatever resources you want. That can be a huge impact on the environment. We have a huge impact on the environment when we pollute. There's a huge focus right now on plastic pollution, but pollution with oil, other chemicals also have a huge impact on the environments where the pollution ends up, which is usually the ocean. Also, by fragmenting habitats, we also affect the biodiversity. And I'll get into a little more detail on how this works, because it also have a huge impact on how cities, roads and everything have an impact on our natural world. So I'll try to show you. So remember that different organisms like different habitats. So let's just, for example, look at one of my favorite animals here, the hedgehog. So we have a little hedgehog here. A badly drawn hedgehog. Oh. Hedgehogs are cool. So if we have a habitat here, this used to be like how the area used to be. There were some woodland over here. There were a little lake down here. And there were some meadows here. And maybe we had, let's say, some open vegetation here. If you're the hedgehog, this is a nice place to be. Wherever you need to find a mate, you can go wherever you want to. If you need food, there's plenty of worms, snails, stuff to find. This is a nice place to be a hedgehog. But now we go in and say, oh, this is nice, but I'm just gonna, here, I am gonna build my house. And I'm gonna make a road here. And that lake over there, it's a bit annoying, so I'll drain most of it. A little lake here, and the rest here will be my garden, which is fenced, and the meadow here. Oh yeah, I'll put in my horses here. Now, for me, this might still look exactly the same. This was a wonderful place I bought. Now I put my house, my road, everything here. For me, this is wonderful. For the hedgehog, maybe less so, because for the hedgehog, the road I put in here is actually kind of a border. Yes, it can cross it, but you all know what happened when hedgehogs cross the road. Sometimes it will run over. So now I have actually fragmented the habitat. It will be harder now for a hedgehog to find food, to find mates, to move around. It'll be harder for its young ones to migrate. If I do this in a larger and larger scale, I can in the end up fragmenting the environment. So even though I do have forest, I do have a little lake, they're separated by barriers that make migration hard. Now, for some animals, these borders doesn't matter. If you're a seagull, just fly over it. But if you're a toad or a snail, you don't need to add many barriers before this becomes a problem. So by fragmenting the habitat, we also make it harder for some of the species to survive, and thereby we end up decreasing biodiversity. Another way of changing the environment is by removal of keystone species. For example, here in Denmark, we have a huge debate now about wolves, because a few wolves have the courage to sneak back into Denmark, and we've killed all the wolves a few hundred years ago. When you remove a species that humans either don't like or like too much, we change the environment. So if we have an environment here where we have a top predator, and those might be hunted because we don't want them, as we do with wolves, or maybe because people really love to hunt them, like trophy hunting of lions, tigers, so on. Eventually, that hunting can put those top predators, into danger, or it might push the species into extinction. This will have a profound effect all the way down the food web, because whoever used to be eaten, in this case here it could be the deer, they don't have a top predator anymore, so their population will now increase. And maybe the deer, whatever they used to eat, the vegetation they used to eat, will now be under more stress because you now have more deer eating the vegetation. This is of course very, very simplified, but you get the idea that when we humans, by hunting, remove a top predator, we change the environment. And you might say, oh, is this a big deal? Yeah, and humans have done this ever since the Stone Age. This is actually one of the things we see in all other areas of the world except Africa, that when humans migrate into an area, what happens is all the large mammals more or less gets it. Because we are very, very effective hunters. So we'll kill off the woolly mammoth, we'll kill off whoever was there, and we end up with smaller mammals who have found a way to live with us humans. We do the same by fishing. We tend to like the large fish, for example, whales, although they're not fish, I do know they're a mammal. Whaling almost drove many whale species to extinction, thereby changing the food web in the ocean. We really love our tuna, but by catching many tunas, we remove a keystone predator, thereby changing the ecosystem. We do love, or I don't, but some people do love shark fin soup. So we end up fishing up a lot of sharks. Sharks being the top predator in the ecosystem, this changes our ecosystem. So fishing can do the same. We can change the ecosystem, and some fishing can also be damaging. Because if we have our fishing boat here, again, badly drawn fishing boat, if we have the big trawls, which would drag over the bottom, yes, that will catch a lot of fish, but that trawl will also destroy whatever could be down there. That could be corals, that could be reefs, that could be population of mussels, so on. So fishing like this is kind of, cutting down the orchard to get the apples. So our ways of fishing, our ways of hunting can also lead to habitat destruction, whether we want it or not. One part of habitat destruction that is now we have a lot of focus on in the media is deforestation. And deforestation is simply cutting down the forest to have room for mainly farming, mining, and timber production. We see this happening in the Amazon, where the Amazon rainforest is being cut down to make room for farming. We see in Indonesia, in Borneo, where the original rainforest is being cut down to have palm oil plantations. And this happens because, we are many people here on Earth. We like farming. We do like having cheap oil. We do like having, cheap metals for our phones and so on. And since many of those resources are on areas where there's now forest, that forest being cut down. Now this of course leads to economic growth, at least to some degrees where we do it, but it also leads to some problems. The major issues with deforestation is of course loss of biodiversity. Our rainforests are areas with very, very high biodiversity. We have many niches, we have many species who have adapted to living together. So by damaging them or removing them, that leads to loss of biodiversity, especially when we cut, big roads through the rainforest. That leads to fragmentation, as I talked about earlier. It also leads to soil loss, because we used to have big trees whose roots kept the soil in place. When we remove those trees, if you have a big rainstorm, as you often have in the tropics, a lot of the fertile soil will get washed into the rivers, which will then lead to this farmland, which we have now made, very quickly becoming worse, and you have not as good farmland as you maybe wanted to. You can also eventually impact the rain cycle. As a rainforest, as its name say, there is so much water evaporating from the rainforest that it tends to lead to its own cloud formation, and by cutting down those trees you'll also have less of this controlled evaporation, and thereby you can change the entire weather system and you can change the rain patterns around here. Now this of course is, as a biologist, something that is deeply troubling, but we must also realize that who did this the first? We did. There is not much natural forest left in Denmark. Denmark is covered by farms, it's covered by roads, it's covered by cities. Why? Because we cut down our original forest. There are only very small patches of it left. So we got rich by destroying our own ecosystem, by changing our habitat. So we must remember that before we start yelling at other countries that we ourselves did just this. There's very little forest left in Denmark, who is not in production. The good thing is, though, that we're now talking about having more untouched forest in Denmark, and that would be absolutely awesome, because that will lead to higher biodiversity, which is something that I believe is a huge thing. So what we talked about here is habitat destruction by human activity. And the key word to remember is that when this happens, we lose species, we lose biodiversity, and in the end we can lose entire ecosystems. This is like on land. On ocean, the rainforest on ocean is the coral reef. Coral reefs only cover a small percentage of the ocean floor, but in the amount of species who live there, they are huge. They are like the rainforest under the water, because the corals lead to many small micro niches where other animals can live, the clownfish and so on. And the coral is also under threat from fishing, from pollution, and, as I'll talk about later, from climate change. So the rainforest under the sea is like the rainforest above the sea, also under pressure from human activity. Thank you for being with me for this video, and again I apologize for the small whiteboard and the bad camera and the bad sound, but this is the equipment I have now. Thank you.